Okay. I think we were just discussing this. I think this section is probably easier. Obviously, where do you see this in this part of it? Quadratic equation. Okay. So the two objectives, so 82, 83. 82 is finding the discriminant. Okay, and we find the discriminant by using this part of the quadratic equation. Okay. And then we're going to write quadratic equations when we're actually given the solutions. So we're kind of going backwards. Like you guys solved it and found the solutions. So objective 83 will be a little bit tougher than the first objective, but not bad. Okay, if you've paid attention to what happens when we've set it equal to 0 and when we've solved equations. Okay, and I'll review that with you. Okay, so write that first thing down if you haven't written that down already. Okay. Actually, before I scoot that down, I want you to write, just because I'm not making you write that, you're just going to write, this is how we find the discriminant, so just write the word discriminant next to that formula. So it's discriminants. Discriminant. Okay, so when they ask you, because the questions will ask you, find the discriminant, you'll use this formula. The other time, they'll ask you to determine the nature of the root. Okay, so that's this next part that we're going to write, and I'll explain where this is coming from. Okay, let's get this down. So write this down. So if the discriminant, so actually when you find that answer, if the discriminant is positive, then you will have two real answers. Okay, so basically they're saying in the quadratic equation, when you find this, not taking the square root, just what's underneath. Okay, what's underneath the square root, because notice that formula didn't have the square root around it, it just had what was underneath here. So when you find this number, okay, if you get a positive number, say like 9, okay, square root of 9 is actually what? What is the square root of 9? 3, but when we brought it out, we had a positive and a negative, right? So that's where we get the two real. Okay, so that's that first part. So you have a positive number that is underneath the radical. If you were to actually follow through and do the rest of the problem, which we are not in this section, so if you get a positive thing, then you're going to say that there's two real solutions. Or two real roots, they might say. Okay? If the discriminant is 0, that is under there, you're only going to have 1. Because the square root of 0, when it comes out, we don't have positive and negative 0. It's just going to be 0. Okay? So if the discriminant underneath here winds up being nothing, okay? If we were to solve it, all we'd have left would be this. Because if I went 5 plus 0, it's still going to be 5 over 2, right? And 5 minus 0 is still going to be 5 over 2, because minus and adding zeros, right, isn't going to change that number. So that's why there's one solution, or one real. Okay. What did we get when we had a negative underneath here? We got what type of numbers? I, right? Imaginary numbers. So that's where this comes from. So if the discriminant is negative, then you don't get any real numbers because they're imaginary numbers. Okay, so you could write 0 real or put 2 imaginary numbers because you're going to get a positive and a negative I. Okay. So when they ask you to determine the nature of the root, you're either going to write 2, 1, or 0. Okay. That make a little bit of sense, hopefully. You'll find out when you do the problems. Okay, we good? Everybody still ready? Okay, next one. Okay, this is our first problem. Okay, so we're going to do both of them. Sometimes, most of the questions they only ask you one or the other. Okay, but we're going to practice both of them so you know how to answer it. Okay, so if I'm finding the discriminant, I'm using that formula. So I would square b first. Well, what is squaring b? If I squared b, 9, right? Okay, so I'd have 9 minus what? What was the next part of that equation that you wrote? 4 times 2 times 4. So we're using that discriminant part of the formula, okay, to actually get our answer. So we're going to go a negative 4 times 2, which would be a negative 8, and a negative 8 times 4 would be 32. Okay, so now I have 9 minus 32. So the discriminant, the answer is what? Negative 23. Okay, so when they're asking for the discriminant, you actually put the number. Okay, when they ask you for the nature of the root, now you're going back to either writing 2, 1, or 0. Okay, so what are we going to write because it's negative? 0. Okay, so 0, real. Okay, or you could write 2 imaginary. Okay, most of the time I would just write that. Or you can just put 0. I'm good with that. 2, 1, or 0. Okay. Okay, so some of the times they're just going to ask you what is the nature of the root. Well, you don't know that until you find the discriminant. They might not be asking for the discriminant. You could put it there if you want to, but most of the time they're just asking for one or the other. Pretty easy? Okay, let's try it again. I want you to try it. So this would be the try it question. This is the last one. I feel like this is easy enough. Okay, it didn't ask for this, but what did you get for the discriminant? 0, right? Okay, because you would have got, when you squared 12, you would have got 144, right? And then a negative 4 times 9 actually gives you 144. So 144 minus 144 is 0. So the discriminant would be 0. Okay, so what was it that we said when the discriminant was 0? How many roots? 1. Okay. We good? Just 1. Yeah. Yeah, because they're wanting to know the nature of the roots. So how many is there? 2, 1, or none? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't have to write the whole thing out. Okay, we good? Okay, now this is leading into, you don't need to write this, okay? This is leading into this next section, okay? So when we were doing this and we were factoring, one of the ways was quadratic, and completing the square. This one you can actually factor, so I'm going to do it that way. Okay, signs were the same, they were both going to be negative. Splitting my square of that is 2x, this is 2x, 9 would be 3 and 3, right? Because that gives me a negative 6, that gives me a negative 6, which gives me a negative 12. But when we went to solve it, remember we set each one of these equal to 0. Well, what type of answer am I going to get on that? A fraction, but they're both going to be the same, right? So that answers your question that you just had there. So I would have 2x minus 3 equals 0. I would add the 3 over to the other side, right? 2x. And then I divide by 2, divide by 2. So x is equal to 3 halves, right? Well, I get the same answer for that one. So that's where you get your one real, because there is only one answer for that one, okay? And then that's going back to the easier way versus us having to actually solve these. Okay, now keep in mind, this next section, now they're giving us this, and they want us to write what it looks like, and then we go back to that direction. So we're going backwards. Okay, So notice what happens. In the parentheses, we have a negative, right? But when the answer comes out, when we're writing what the x is, it's the opposite. It's positive. So it's positive 3 over 2. But in the parentheses, we had a negative. Okay, starting super simple, hopefully. Okay, just write this, and then we're going to solve it. So this is actually problem number 3. You don't have to write this. That's the name of the objective. So you're just write a quadratic equation that has 3 and a negative 5 as its solutions. We're starting with whole numbers, not fractions. We'll get to fractions. And this is what the problems will look like, written out in sentence format. So write a quadratic equation that has 3 and negative 5 as its solutions. Okay, so if you were just listening on that previous page, I said when we get the answer, what was in the parentheses is actually opposite, right? Okay, so if I'm writing my 2 parentheses that are set equal to 0, I'm going to have an x in both of them, okay? If this is a 3, what is going to be in here? Negative 3, right? Because if I set this equal to 0 and solve for x, I get a positive 3. Does that make sense? Okay, what's the next one? Positive 5. Okay, so we're almost there. So now we're just working our way backwards like we were on that previous page. Okay, now I just need to distribute and write the quadratic equation. Okay, so x times x would be x squared. I'd add 5x and a negative 3x, so that gives me a positive 2x minus 15 equals 0. That's what we're looking for. That's your answer. Don't say, I know it's easy right now. Let's wait. Well, you tell me in a couple more problems. Yes. Okay, good? Okay. Now, we'll see how much you really were paying attention. You're not writing the whole sentence out. Okay? But if you're paying attention to the one that I did on the board that I told you not to write down, we'll see if you can remember where the numbers were at. Okay, so negative 2/3 and 3/5. Okay, so when I'm working with this one, okay, I know inside here this is going to be a positive. Okay, now I just need to remember which one went where. Okay, what went here? The 3. Okay, so the 3 goes here, and then the 2 goes here. So remember when we set it equal to 0, if I moved the 2 to the other side, it became a negative, and then I had to divide by 3. We good? Okay, so now let's see if we can get the next one. So the next one's going to be a minus. So what's going to go in this spot? 3, and then what goes here? 5. Okay, so now we're at where we're at with the last one. Okay, we're just distributing, and you should get 15x squared plus x minus 6. Good? Okay, so there's a pattern here that I want you to add on that is happening every time. We just don't notice it, but it's going to make it easier for the toughest problems there is, which is the next one that I'm doing with you. I'm going to do it with you, and then you're going to try one, and we're actually done. Okay. All of these are x minus whatever the answer they are telling you to plug it in for. All of them. It's always a minus. Okay. So if I say plug in a negative 2, you're actually writing this as x minus a negative 2, right? And then we change it to a positive. Okay, so if I had it as a negative 4, okay, when I'm plugging in a negative 4 here, it's really x plus 4. If I plug in 1/3, okay, it's really x minus 1/3 equals 0, okay, but we can't have this, So we take this to the other side and multiply it by what to get rid of the denominator? 3. Okay, so when I distribute it, I get 3x, right? And when I distribute it, this goes away and leaves the minus 1, okay? And then equals 0. That's where we get our plus 1 divided by 3. Okay. We're good? Okay, so keeping that in mind, the x minus the answer. We're going to do this one right here. So this, I lost track of my numbers. 5? Okay. Okay, so keeping in mind the x minus the answers. Okay, so I'm going to plug these in. So this is going to be x minus my answer. So my answer that I'm plugging in here is 2 plus 3i. Okay, now I'm doing the same thing with this other one, because remember we have the 2 sets of parentheses. Okay. So I'm going x minus, and I'm plugging in my answer, which was 2 minus 3i. Good, so far. All of these are x minus whatever you're plugging in. Sometimes we have the negative, right? So then we changed it to a positive. Okay, so I need to distribute this negative to here. So this is x minus 2 minus 3i. All I did was distribute. Okay, now the other one. I have x minus 2 plus 3i. Okay, I want you to see if you can distribute or FOIL and get your answer. So you're going to go x times negative 2, x times 3i. Then you'll be done with the x. Then you distribute your negative 2. Combine like terms. How are we doing so far? Okay, so when I distributed the x, right, I got x squared. Then I got a negative 2x. And then it really doesn't matter the order, just as long as when you do it again, you keep it in the same order. Okay. And so then I went that times that, so times, because you can't combine it. So I was done with that. So then I went to here. So negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative times a negative is a positive 4. And I just started lining my things up for them. You could all go in one line if you wanted to. Okay. And then a negative 2 times 3i gave me a negative 6i. Okay, then I went to this one. So there's my xi. So I went ahead and lined them up with my xi. A negative times a negative is a positive 6i. Okay, and then a negative times a positive would be a negative 3i squared. So now I'm going to combine my like terms. Okay, so x squared, I didn't have another one, so it stays the same. I'm done with that. Okay, a negative 2x, that would give me a negative 4x, so I'm done with that. What happens to that one? Cancels each other out. What happens to that one? Cancels each other out. So I'm going to wait for this last one, because what happens when I have an I squared? Right, it changes to a negative 1, so it's a negative 9 times a negative 1, which will change that negative 9 to a positive 9. So now it gets screwed with this, okay, because this is a negative 9 times a negative 1, which gives me the positive 9. Okay, so then that means that that's going to be plus 2. That will be your toughest problem that there is. Okay. Okay. Let's see if you can try this last one on your own and get it. So remember, it's answer minus, and then put it in the parentheses on both. 6, right? Write it on my paper. Okay, how do we do? You get it? Okay, and honestly, in this one, if you're just not paying attention to positives and negatives, that's just where you're going to mess up. Okay, so I want to show you something real quick. You don't need to do this. But if I use completing of the square to actually solve this, right? I move the 10 over to the other side, so I'd have x squared plus 6x equals negative 10, right? We divide by 2, so this would be x plus 3, that is squared. Okay, what goes there? Plus 9. So what I do to this side, I've got to do this side, right? Okay, so this is going to have what here? Negative 1. And then we got to do this as doing the square root, right? In square root. So the square gets rid of the square roots. This leaves x plus 3 equals, but when that comes out, it's going to change to I. Okay. So now, and then we move it over to the other side. So it'd be a negative 3 plus or minus I, which is what you started with. Okay. So that's, it's just moving backwards is where that's coming from. Obviously, you don't have to do that. We've already tested and that's gone. Okay. All right. So try it. I split them with the two sides. So 82 is on one side, 83 is on the other side.